The Annual Misery Index, which ranks countries on misery based on economic measures, is out. Of the 157 countries analyzed, Zimbabwe is the most miserable at rank 1, and Switzerland is the least miserable at 157th rank. India is at 103, neither as wretched or pathetic as the Zimbabweans, nor as cheery and joyous as the Swiss. First, a little bit about the Hanke Index itself. Hanke is an acronym for Hanke's Annual Misery Index, compiled by Steve Hanke, a professor of applied economics at the Johns Hopkins University in the US. Essentially, the Hanke Index is an attempt to measure misery based purely on economic indicators. Obviously, it has its inbuilt weaknesses, but this is how it's measured. The Hanke Index is a sum of unemployment multiplied by 2 times inflation and bank lending rate minus the annual percentage change in GDP per capita. Incidentally, this is the first time that unemployment has been given double weightage. Joblessness does make a society really miserable, doesn't it? Hanke says the human condition lies in a vast spectrum between miserable and happy. And the way to mitigate misery of high inflation, high borrowing cost and unemployment is to grow the economy. And this is how the country is ranked. The most miserable 3 are Zimbabwe, Venezuela and Syria. We have 2 of our neighbors quite miserable, Sri Lanka at 11th place and Pakistan at 35th. We are at 103, and that poor ranking is owed mostly to a high unemployment rate. The US is at 134, China is at 142, and the top 4 are Japan, Ireland, Kuwait and Switzerland. So that's the economic formula to measure misery. But we all know that misery or joy isn't all about economic status. Don't we all have some friends who are immensely rich but are miserable? And some other friends who have very modest economic means but are cheerful and joyous. So why is India, which is on the road or aiming to be a $5 trillion economy and with predictions of the least chance of recession, feel the pangs of misery? Different reasons. One, the misery of corruption. If there's one thing that is mortally damaging modern India, it is corruption. From village officials to cabinet ministers, corruption is deep-seated across the country and no government, no political party is able to address it. Last week, vigilance officials arrested a village field assistant in Palakkam village, Kerala, V. Suresh Kumar. A search of his residence showed he had accumulated more than 10 million rupees in cash, besides various other stuff, from shirts and dhotis to honey and even bottles of water. It is not in some isolated Kerala village only where the average citizen faces corrupt government officials. It is right across the country. This week we heard from Punjab that the Punjab Vigilance Bureau's anti-corruption action had received 7,939 complaints of corruption by government officials with audio and video proof. But what happens to government officials who are caught red-handed for corruption? Virtually nothing. They get a suspension or a transfer and they have a laugh about it. Pre-independence, Bal Gangadhar Tilak said, "Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it." Post-independence, the average Indian citizen seems to feel that for government employees and politicians, corruption is their birthright and work right and they shall have it. Misery 2, a lack of equity and civic sense. The Global Slavery Index released this week by the human rights organization Walk Free says about 50 million people on earth today live in modern slavery conditions, 11 million of them in India. Modern slavery covers legal concepts like forced labor, forced marriage, debt bondage, slavery and slavery-like practices, and human trafficking. Have we lost that basic instinct for human equity? Our lack of civic sense is on display everywhere. Our waste dumps on the road, in the rivers, in the sea, smoking waste mountains across the country. In a particularly disgusting development, it was reported this week that some Kerala government employees were bringing household wastes, including used sanitary pads, into the government offices and dumping them in the secretariat waste bins. Can we sink lower? Misery 3, the decline of education. Just as we expect corruption across government offices, we expect every student in every school to get A+ in every subject across the country. And the class 10 results give us fraudulent goosebumps. The class 10 results this year, pass percentage, Goa 96.6%, Punjab 97.5%, and Kerala 99.7%. Like schools and free marks, we have our universities and easy PhDs. So we weren't shocked to hear this week that the South Asian University in Delhi was offering 8,000 rupees per month to PhDs for the position of part-time assistant. PhDs are a dime a dozen in this country, so that must be the going market rate. And then we have a daily dose of misery, like when we have to change our currency yet again. When we hear that 40 Indians in Manipur have been shot dead by Indian police and Indian security officials. When we see our Olympic medal winning wrestlers being dragged and shoved around in the national capital, and the wrestlers feel so miserable, they want to throw their Olympic medals into the Ganga. When we hear an ex-IPS officer reportedly saying that the wrestlers will be shot if needed. When we hear of a 20-year-old youth in Delhi stabbing a 16-year-old girl to death, stabbing her more than 20 times and then bludgeoning her head with a stone, and everyone standing around, not even making an attempt to stop him. When we hear of a food inspector in Chhattisgarh draining out more than 2 million liters of water out of an irrigation dam because he had dropped his mobile phone into it. A food inspector, of course, is much more important than thousands of farmers. And millions of Indians would have felt miserable this week for the first citizen of this country because she was not invited for the parliament opening. So we actually don't need Steve Hanke's misery index to tell us our misery level. By the way, I am also feeling miserable this week, losing my YouTube right hand, videographer, director of photography and editor Sunil Francis to migration. Like thousands of Indian youth his age, Sunil too left the country this week, hoping for more joy elsewhere. So that I don't leave you on a note of misery, let me leave you with a tale of fighting misery through grit and determination, overcoming overwhelming odds. 27-year-old Sherin Shahana from Wayanad, Kerala was literally moving from one misery to another over the last 6-7 years. She lost her father, she got into a toxic marriage and suffered domestic abuse at her husband's house, and then she had a fall from the terrace of her house, leaving her paralyzed and bedridden for 2 years, and then went through memory loss. Imagine igniting civil service ambitions and working for it through all the trauma. This week when the results were announced, she had come 913th, as good as any other higher rank, given her condition. Congratulations, Sherin Shahana. You were once miserable, now you're inspirational.